Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 19. In response to last week's episode discussing what is a Lubavitcher, what defines a Lubavitcher, and Shlichus, I received a very large number of responses and comments. And being that we are now in the weeks preceding Gimmel Tammuz, and hopefully we won't have to honor this day because Mashiach will be here long before that, nevertheless, it seems appropriate in this time to talk about the Rebbe, to talk about hiskashrus, to the connection to the Rebbe, what the Rebbe wants of us, and especially 20 years since that fateful day, however you interpret it, it definitely requires introspection and cheshbon hanefesh to look at ourselves, how are we living up to the expectations and the empowerment and the gift of faculties and koiches that the Rebbe gave us. So let me begin by reading a few of the questions and continuing this subject. Question number 1. What defines a Lubavitcher? Did you help close the door? This writer writes. I heard part of your talk about what is a Lubavitcher. I was very disappointed with your answer. Were you trying to say anyone who does not do Shlichus is not a Lubavitcher? That is the message I heard. I have been asked this question by young people. If I'm not a shliach, then am I a disappointment to the Rebbe? And does it all go downhill from there? I'm not a shliach, I'm a disappointment. Why should I have a full beard? Why shouldn't I indulge in secular music, etc.? Is this really the message you were trying to get across? I didn't hear any room for the person who has another calling than full-time shlichus to take pride in being a Lubavitcher. Is this really what you meant? Okay, very good question, legitimate question, and I will address that as well. Another questioner asks, in last week's episode, you seemed to tell the person that asked you if it was acceptable to want to make lots of money, that it was not, and that he should focus on shlichus. Doesn't that conflict with what you have said previously about each person's challenges? Based on what I have learned from you so far, I would have thought that you would have told him to direct his inclinations toward making money and using it in the correct ways, such as supporting shluchim, giving tzedakah, or other ways of spreading out the wellsprings that money can help with. Instead, you seem to dismiss his desire to make money. As you go on to say, we are all shluchim, and that may take different form than being a Chabad shliach that goes to the banquet. Please clarify. Another questioner asks, as I grew up in Chabad schools and Chabad education, I was taught that one has to have the feeling of going on shlichus, that was it. But I'm not a shlucha, I'm a teacher. And I feel like a second-class Chabad citizen. My question is, how can our education system set a goal that is unrealistic? There are not enough shlichus positions or even teaching positions for everyone. And is teaching really option B? Does that make us second-class citizens? And then, finally, one more question, reflecting a different aspect of what I discussed, and that was, you mentioned and discussed, and I couldn't agree more, that we have enough Jews out there that we need many, many more shluchim. In fact, I live in a large city that could easily use 10 more shluchim, but the official shluchim don't want anyone else here at this time. The question is, will the bureaucratic state of affairs take care of it? Will the bureaucrats take care of it? Sorry. In the meantime, the rates of intermarriage, conversion, and assimilation in general could be getting worse, chas v'sholem. Since this is pikuach nefesh, I'm wondering if there's any way you could personally jumpstart something and discuss this in a forum with a committee, obviously in a proper way, in a setting to fix the problem. Okay. There are a few more questions in the same vein that I think captures these, what I've read, capture the spirit of most of the questioners. So let me address it as best as my ability. Last episode, I cited and referred people to read different sichos and talks of the Rebbe. I want to just reiterate something which seems obvious. There's only one entity that can define what is a Lubavitcher. Not I, not you, not any person on this earth. It's the Rebbe himself. It's not defined, it's not a democratic process in the sense where we come to a consensus what's a Lubavitcher. The Rebbe and the Rabbeim, as Lubavitcher Rabbeim, that's their role, define what are the standards, what are the expectations. Obviously, there are many aspects to it because Ein Deis Ein Shavis. There isn't one type of chassid, there are many types of different backgrounds, different talents, different skills. When you read the talks of the Rebbe, you read the letters of the Rebbe, which is what I tried to convey in last episode, there's the underlying message in the Rebbe's words in Chayesara and Vayishlach, Tov Shemem Zayin. This is the mitzvahs hador. The Rebbe repeats it several times. This is the mitzvah of our generation. Geht reis und wird schluchem und nehmt ein die Welt mit Yiddishkeit. Wird schluchem geht reis und nehmt ein die Welt mit Yiddishkeit. I remember when the Rebbe said that at a Farbringen with a passion, with a vision, with his global expanse. And it made everybody shudder in a positive way. The Rebbe leading a world, giving a generation a mitzvah, a shlichus, a mitzvah. Mitzvah sador. And it wasn't the only time the Rebbe said it. So I didn't want to dilute that in any way. To start looking for what we call b'di'evid, second options, third options, fourth options. They may be options, and they may even be appropriate. But the first thing, we must not mince words and not in any way dilute or compromise the integrity of the Rebbe's original message. I quoted Shmini Tov Shechai, hundreds of sichas. I just gave 5, 6, 7 examples where the Rebbe made it clear. Our generation, the mitzvah sador is yafutza meinesecha chutza. The first mimer, the Rebbe says it, says what the shlichus of the entire 7th generation, and he doesn't make exceptions. Which means that this is the shlichus of every man and woman and child of our time. And there's no way to really define it in other ways, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable we may be about it. This is the Rebbe's declaration, without any type of innuendos, but remez, very clear, mitzvah sador, the mitzvah of our generation. However, this itself can manifest in many ways, which is what I want to address more in detail now. Now, this fellow, the first question I said, I heard part of your talk. Well, I'm not insulted you only heard part or not at all. But obviously, it's hard to ask a question if you don't hear everything that was said. Maybe it was qualified. So I would suggest to this questioner or to any questioner, if you're going to ask a question, at least afford me the respect to listen to the whole statement before you say, because I may have qualified or I may have addressed it. Again, not out of respect to me, but simply we're going to have an intelligent conversation. Let's include all of it. Secondly, more importantly, not what I've said, read the sichas. Read the sichas and see you have a question on what the Rebbe said. Then we can address it. No problem to ask questions. This forum, MyLife, is clearly, I've been criticized for taking all questions. But frankly, I think every question is acceptable and nothing is off limits. But we have to at the same time as you ask a question, you have to also read the context. You have to read the sources. We have to read what the Rebbe says and ask, is the question on what the Rebbe said, or is the question on how I or someone else interpreted what the Rebbe said? That's a legitimate discussion. So that's the first thing I want to say. More specifically, this idea of shlichus manifests in many ways. If a person feels, and that's what I conveyed, hopefully I tried to convey in the last episode, and I reiterate again, feels in their soul, 24/7, I am on a shlichus from the Eibishter, my neshama came down to this earth. God sent the soul down, and the Rebbe, the leader of our generation, told us, what my mission is. My mission is to do everything possible with my faculties, with my opportunities, with the people I meet, the places I travel to spread Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza, the well springs outward, to reach every Jew I can reach, to reach every non-Jew with the message of God. If a person feels that way, that is what the Rebbe wanted to achieve. How you manifest that and how that expresses itself is many different ways, which we shall discuss. So, obviously, the easiest way and the simplest way, as the Rebbe said in many of these sichos, is to simply take your whole life, instead of dedicating to a business or dedicating to your own needs, including even learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, is to go and find yourself a city in the world where you can become a beacon of light, Neres Lahoyer, to spread Yiddishkeit, to spread Chassidus. That's the simplest and easiest way. And thousands of shluchim and shluchas have done exactly that. That is clearly something the Rebbe not only wanted, the Rebbe encouraged and pushed and called them shluchim. That does not mean, however, that there aren't other ways to manifest and express it. But I don't want to in any way compromise this initial approach. There's actually a letter from the Rebbe. I cite a letter here from Tavshin Lamed Tes. That would be 1979. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. It's printed now in Likutei Sichos, volume 24, page 392. It's a letter to the Shluchim that the Rebbe sent in 1976, 77, and 78. The Rebbe sent Shluchim groups of 10, some couples, mostly couples, and a few Bochrim as well, who later got married. Send them in 3 groups to Israel as Shluchim. Till this day, they still have a Kinnus HaShluchim every year. That's actually the first Kinnus was in Israel, before it became an international Kinnus here in New York, that all the Shluchim from all over the world gathered. First of all, the Shluchim from America, which was later in the early 80s. This was already, the Rebbe already encouraged them to do a Kinnus HaShluchim, and they're Shluchim. They asked the Rebbe, after they were there for a year, this is Lamates, how should they settle in now? And the Rebbe has a very interesting letter where he actually prioritizes how he wants that Shlichus to manifest itself. First, he writes in general what their role is to be mechazik, to strengthen the Yiddishkeit, to strengthen the organizations, to, of course, Yefutzum and Chutza, the Rebbe makes is a major emphasis. Movement V'gam Poshet says that this is, and this should have been the first thing I stated, that the reason it comes at the end, the Rebbe says, because it's not limited to time and space, is hu inyan hapula da fotzes amayonas chutza. Beteichechei hafotza hatera mitzvah b'chlal. Maskal maseres hamivtzoyim hayeduim. The spreading of Chassidus outward, the well springs, among the spreading of Yiddishkeit Torah and Yiddishkeit in general, including the 10 Mivtzoyim. The Rebbe says that should have been the first thing, but that's in general terms. Then the Rebbe goes on and gives an order of priority, what he wants, how that Shlichus to manifest. And here you see clearly the Rebbe recognizes that there are many ways that Shlichus can be done. In this case, the Rebbe begins, number 1, Kol HaMasimim Lazeh. Those that is fitting to them. They should try. And or at least with some effort, they should try to get smicha yodin to become dayanim, and then try to become rabbis in their particular communities. And he continues on. If that doesn't work out, the next order of priority is to become part of the organizations that are there. The next order of priority is to go into the shetach of chinuch, education. And then the last option the Rebbe gives, I'm not going through all the details, you can read it yourself. The Rebbe speaks, and if all that, for whatever reason, doesn't work out, and if you want to come back, let's say, to the United States, the Rebbe also gives conditions and says if it's done the right way, you could do that, but also here too, in the same order of priority. And you'll always remain shluchim, the Rebbe continues. Though this is not a letter to everyone, but you can see a Gilei Das, you can see somewhat of a reflection of the Rebbe's way of thinking here, that Shlichus can take on many different shapes and forms. Here, Rabbonis was a big thing for the Rebbe in Israel, because that's a way to infiltrate communities, to be a rabbi, a leader of a community, of a congregation. But you see here the order of priority. What do you recognize from this? What do we take out of this? We take out of like this, that there's no question number 1 option would be, and again I say what I said last time, last episode, that we're talking here l'chatchila initially, a student, whether a boy or a girl in yeshiva, Chabad yeshiva, Lubavitch yeshivas, is educated to become a soldier, Yitzhak Muhammad's Beis David, and go out there and conquer the world with Yiddishkeit. As I said, I remember the resounding voice of the Rebbe when he yelled it in the Fabrengen. Geht da reis und nehmt ein die Welt mit Yiddishkeit. Werd Shluchim und nehmt ein die Welt mit Yiddishkeit. What means Werd Shluchim? If everybody is a shliach, 7 billion people, 40 million Jews, what means Werd? It means to consciously embrace your mission and actively go and make your life dedicated to conquering your community, your part of the world. So that is for sure the best and easiest way to do it. If for whatever reason a person chooses, or circumstances are such they end up being in a different situation, there's no question that chinuch is not second class. If a person dedicates their life to chinuch, there was a person, a shliach, a bacher who, when he was a chosin, he went to the Rebbe in Yechidus, and the Rebbe said to him, your shlichus is to go into yeshiva. The yeshiva. So he asked the Rebbe, will I be considered a shliach if I go into chinuch? You know, the Rebbe's answer was, if you do it b'mesida v'nesina, if you do it with complete dedication and commitment. What does that mean? If you do it just tamazeh to be yetzer, and you're doing it like a job, or you don't do it with complete dedication, no. But if you do it b'mesida v'nesina, that's your shlichus. So it's very clear for those who end up in the shetach of chinuch They can make a revolution as well. You can make a revolution with your class, with your school, as long as you're doing it with that same type of passion and dedication. Nature has it that's easier to go to a city somewhere out of your comfort zone, and you're in a city where if you don't do anything, you're not going to go anywhere, and you build a mesud, you build a Chabad house. That's, as I said earlier, maybe the easiest way, maybe more Mesidas Nefesh in a certain way. But the commitment to the Rebbe's, knowing that your soul's mission is this and the Rebbe's Shlichus is this, education is absolutely possible. What is that? It's also a commitment to changing people. It's also committed to inspiring and illuminating and bringing Chassidus and Yiddishkeit to people. So why should it not be considered in the same category of Shlichus? And again, it has to be each person according to their situation. The fact that some people consider that second class, first of all, that may be their own political issues, their own personal issues. We're not addressing that. We're addressing how the Rebbe sees it. And absolutely, b'mesidas nesina, a person does that. Now, is it as easy to go into a Meisad Chinuch, a Lubavitcher Meisad Chinuch, an education of our education system, and create a revolution, as it is, for example, to a Shlicha, to go to a city where there's no Yiddishkeit at all, or very little Yiddishkeit? Obviously, it's a lot easier to do it in a city where there's no so-called no existing tziyur of Elikus, no existing shape and form. Whereas in our system, sometimes the complacency, sometimes the habit, Regel Nasa Teva, just like we know that a Baal Tshuva is greater than a tzaddik. Because mitzvahs anoshim ulamad, it becomes inertia, which becomes mechanical, and when there's mechanical stuff, it's always harder to make change. But that doesn't mean it isn't possible. So if you look at it that way, absolutely. Next, and again, I say things lechatchila. Now, what happens if somebody, for whatever reason, decides I want to go into business, to work? So if they had the option beforehand, for sure, the Rebbe, there's no question in my mind, the Rebbe would have said to a person to become a shliach, not to go into business. There are circumstances where the Rebbe did tell people to go into their family business or whatever reason. But let's say one didn't ask or one decided that's what they want to do. Does this suddenly close off the door for you being a Lubavitcher Chassid and the Rebbe's emissary? No. It may be more difficult. The Rebbe was opposed, for example, to shluchim to be business people. Why? Because you can't focus in both places. Here you're focusing on running a business and making money. And here you're focusing on helping others. You need to raise money. But you know that your whole mission is to raising money for a non-profit organization. And it's not about figuring out how to make profits. But if a person does go into business, this doesn't mean the doors are closed. First of all, my brother-in-law, Olav Shalom, is a good example. Reb Shaya Gansberg, who passed away last year tragically at a young age. He was in business for many years. And then at age 50, he decided he's becoming a shliach in Harlem. So number one, there's that option. Number two, even if a person is in business, and if I go back to what I said before, but he knows his business is only a tuffle. He or she fully knows that his work and business is simply a means. I'm not saying it's easy to know that, but let's say he's able to be saturated with that sense, that every person who comes into his store, or every client he has, every vendor he has, everyone he deals with, he knows Hashgacha Pratis led them to them in order to bring to them Chassidus and Yiddishkeit. If a person lives that way 24/7, absolute shliach of the Rebbe. It may not be as conventional. It may not be as easy, because the nisyanos are far more difficult, because you're immersed yourself in that type of world, and it's very hard to do that same type of, have that attitude. But if a person can pull that off, like we have this story with B'Yomen Kletzker, that when he was asked, how could you be thinking about, or saying Tilim, or thinking about Eined Milvade while you're working? He says, if I could think about business while I'm davening, I can think about davening while I'm in business. If a person has that attitude, that his real life is like the famous story, there came one of the Rabbeim, one of the Chassidim, who was in business, and after a while he changed his garments, and the Rebbe said, why are you wearing more worldly garments and not the Chassidic garments you always wore? So he says he doesn't want to be a hypocrite. That's where he's involved in, he's immersed in the material world, and that's what he is. So the Rebbe said to him, I thought it was the opposite, that when you were doing work you were a hypocrite, and the real you was expressed in the garments. And you have to do work, like it says, B'loi lev v'lev. The cup is nisht in galoshin. The famous story with the Rebbe Rashab, who told one of his chassidim who became a big galoshes manufacturer, he says, a fist in galoshin, a big gezen. I saw feet in galoshes, but a cup in galoshin. I never saw a head in galoshes. His head was completely immersed. So if a person knows that his whole work is just a stepping stone, and Hashgacha Pratis, then absolutely. No different than the Rebbe told Dr. Block in Canada. And others who were in college, were taking whatever courses, told them to finish. And when they wanted to become yeshiva bachim, or they wanted to become rabbis, or they wanted to become shluchim, in the technical sense of it, the Rebbe said, your shlichus is to go back to that university and teach godliness through Aristotelian philosophy. What is the meaning of that? Because divine providence, God leads the footsteps of a human being. That Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, has led you there. That's your shlichus. So for you to suddenly change and suddenly become what other people are doing, maybe that's not why your soul came down to earth. So you see from this that shlichus is a far broader concept and encompasses. But for someone to say, I'm going to go into business, or I'm going to do whatever I want to do, what I want to do, and yeah, I'm going to have a picture of the Rebbe hanging, or I'm going to eat Lubavitcher Cholent, if there's such a thing. And by the way, that's the Rebbe's reference in the Shmini Tov Shen Chai. He says, Essen Cholent, etc. Very nice. You're doing a mitzvah Shabbos, but what does that have to do with going to war? Godin, worthy of being a warrior, you're not. So how that shlichus manifests can be many ways, but it's an attitude. But to start saying, I want to be in my comfort zone, do what I want, and say at the same time, you're the Rebbe's dedicated soldier, you explain to me how that works. So no doors are closed, but you have to do something for it. There's a price to pay. It doesn't come automatically. It's not just a birthright in saying I grew up in a Lubavitcher family, I went to Lubavitcher schools. There's a price you pay. So I just gave here several examples how that manifests. If the shluchim in Israel became rabbonim, you could say they're a rabbi, they're being paid by the government, they're being supported by their community. That is the shlichus that Rebbe sent them on. So shlichus means being saturated and permeated 24/7, knowing that your soul came down to this earth for a purpose. And the Rebbe defines what that purpose is in our generation. In the broader sense of the word, hafotz hatera mitzvahs, another way of putting it, etc., etc. And there are many ways it can express itself. So now comes the question that many asked, I want to go on shlichus, but I have nowhere to go. Okay, well, you know something, as I said, and I say it again, if we're Chassidim or mishpacha, we're all united. We have to put our heads together, especially now 20 years from Gimmel Tammuz, and take a deal with this. There are hundreds and hundreds of young men and women who are passionate, ignited, want to be soldiers in this army. And what do? If it's a territorial issue, address it. As I said, there are 14 million Jews. There are Ken Yirbu, 7 billion non-Jews. There's plenty to do. We know that. I'm not getting into now the technicalities. It's not my role or position to say how. But if people are dedicated to the Rebbe's Rotzen and Kavanah and bottle to it and know that's the goal, you put your heads together, we'd figure it out in ways that are acceptable, in ways that are tolerable, in ways that people can live with. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily being addressed that way. Vayeshev Tovshin MyLife is a sikha, which I referred to a number of times. The Rebbe gives very strict, strong guidelines of how it should be done and what should be done, and definitely negating all the fears and insecurities that people may have. So it's about putting our heads together. At the same time, as I just said, there are many ways to look at shlichus. You know, the concept of a card-carrying member, card-carrying shlich, hiskashrus, what you're invited to or not invited, again, it's not my job here to determine what the criteria are. Different people have different opinions on this matter. But let's talk from the Rebbe's perspective. Rebbe's perspective, as I just said, if a person is 24/7 dedicated, he can be a professor in a university and be a full-fledged shliach. Whether he's recognized and given a $36 charge at the Kinus HaShluchim or more than that, that's a technicality. But I want to go even further. Besides what I've said till now, let's be a little creative. Let's be a little creative here. Just to give a few examples, if a person really wants to apply themselves. We have today, there's in some organizations, there's a thing called twin or cousin cities. For example, I know Dnepropetrovsk, its twin city is Boston. There are cities in the United States that became like cousin cities. What they do is that they, so to speak, take responsibility or they have a relationship with a particular Jewish community in Europe or in Eastern Europe or in Russia, Ukraine, and so on. And they have joint activities. Why is it not conceivable, and this I just throw out as an idea, people can take it or reject it, why is it not conceivable that Anash, wherever people living, whether it's in Crown Heights or Kfar Chabad or Los Angeles, wherever there's a community of Lubavitchers who may be in the business world, Why is it not conceivable that they in some way become, like each one embraces a shliach, wherever they may be, and becomes like a host? Maybe once every few weeks they host people from that community at their home. Maybe they come to the community and speak there. You can create partnerships which benefit everybody. Anyone educated in the Rebbe's Dalet Amos would be willing to participate in such a program. It would benefit the shluchim because they get their free services of people who may give a shir, and obviously in a way that's cooperative and all acceptable, not imposing on anyone. The Rebbe always emphasized Eitzah Teva. You talk about applying yourself, you can find a whole new way of reaching. At the end of the day, remember, any shliach couple can only reach that many people on an ongoing basis. I read somewhere that in the financial markets, even the financial firms, even the best brokers, are not allowed to have more than 100 clients. Why? Even if they're excellent. Because a human being cannot apply themselves to more than 100 people throughout the year and serve them properly. So you think about it naturally, a couple can deal with 100 people, 150 people. I'm not talking about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or a dinner, or once a year event. On an ongoing basis, you push them to and involve themselves with individuals. So imagine having a group of a few balabatim in your community that become essentially an extension of your activities. One example. Let's take another example. There's a big internet. And I'm not coming here as a Rav or to paskin the internet as kosher, not kosher. People use it anyway. The Rebbe spoke, when he spoke about Sheva Mitzvah Reineach, he said, that you go to business anyway with non-Jews. So why not talk to them about God? Talk about everything except God. We're in the internet anyway. Mobile, desktop, laptop, whatever it may be. Why not encourage our young men and women to use their skills and talents, not just to start a business on the internet, to figure out a Yefutza Ma'anesecha initiative? It could be humorous, it could be educational, it could be inspiring. The world is the entire platform for free. Production may cost some money, but distribution is free. You can put up something, and if it becomes viral, you can reach millions of people potentially. Why would that be less of a shlichus if you're dedicated your life to creating your Yefutza Ma'anesecha chutza project? Content, courses, classes, as I said, short sound bites, using social media. It was created from the Rebbe's point of view. If you look at the Sikha of the Rebbe spoke Mishpotim Tov Shemem Daled about radio, it's printed in the Hisofis in the Likutei Sichos Chelik Chavov. The whole beginning of that Sikha, the Rebbe wrote the Ksaviyat Kodshe to the Sikha I prepared, sent it out on like a piece of paper, like an envelope, with footnotes. That's how important it was, where he makes it very clear, as the Rebbe says, that technology is a koyach adir, a powerful force, an enormous force in nature that God created. For what reason? As we learn at the end of Pirkei Avos, the end of the 6th chapter, that what's l'kveide. Narvaden, the Rebbe says, because of Bechira, you could also use it for other things. And he brings with the gold of the Beis HaMikdash. The Medrash says that the whole gold was created for what reason? For the Beis HaMikdash. But for Bechira, you can use it Zov Labal, that they used it for, God forbid, for idolatry. But Bechime Pnei HaShetim, the Rebbe brings the Gemara. Because of the fools, God is going to destroy the universe because some people don't know how to use it. And applies it directly to technology. So it was created for this purpose. A distribution channel to spread Chassidus. Yefutza is distribution. Ma'anesecha is the product called the wellsprings. Chutza is the marketplace. As the Rebbe emphasizes, Chutza she'en chutza mimena. Why should we not be encouraging a whole generation of thousands of young men and women who have all kinds of talents to utilize their faculties, their keiches, their chushim, their innovation, their entrepreneurship to creating ma'anesecha projects? And would that not be shlichus of someone completely dedicated? It's a different form of shlichus. I'm just giving examples, and I'm sure we put our heads together, there are many more. Being creative is the key. Thinking about what the problem is, what the need is, who the target audience is, and finding people that fit that. And as long as it's been mesir and nesina dedicated to that thing, it's complete shlichus. No question, based on all the Rebbe's words. Obviously, as I said, it may be far easier and simpler because it's already been pioneered. It's already been so-called Solol HaSaderech. The path has been paved by the shluchim that were initially pioneers, and now we have already models of young men and women who've gone out into the world and not just did a little. They built empires. They built meisdas. They built organizations, shuls, educational centers, Chabad houses. But that does not preclude the ability, if one goes with the core principle of complete dedication to knowing that your soul came here to spread Torah, Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, that's the key to the whole thing. So this goes back to all the questions that were asked here, whether it's about the money, about second-class citizens, about education. I believe I answered it all in one fell swoop, hopefully, with this approach. And hopefully also other questions that may have come, that you may have or may have come to me that I have not directly answered and responded to. One thing I want to add is I heard a story that Rab Nissen Nemanov, was by the Rebbe in Yechidus and was asking the Rebbe to send shluchim to France, to Brinois, to Paris. The Rebbe smiled and said to him, as you can't imagine how the Rebbe is getting it over his head, so to speak, from fathers and mothers and shvigers and shvers, fathers, mothers, in-laws, for the shluchim I'm already sending out. That's what the Rebbe said. And then the Rebbe continued and said, so Mele, if I start sending even more, you can imagine what I'm going to get. The Rebbe said, but if it comes as an initiative from the people themselves, I'll make sure that I will send them. That's what the Rebbe said. Even though it's implicit in many of the Rebbe's approach to things, Aveda b'koyach atzmei, self-initiative, but this is a specific story. So one condition in all of this is we have to mobilize ourselves. What that means, the sikhs are very clear. But the Rebbe never took anyone by the collar and forced them to do anything. And even when the Rebbe did try, like I said, the Rebbe realized that if you don't have the koyach atzmei, our effort, you're going to have complaints from parents and from in-laws and from everybody. And at the end of the day, it's far more owned by someone, but panimius when the initiative comes from below. As Chassidus speaks about, asus latata, maybe a lower intensity, but it's yours, you own it. You desire one kav, it's only one kav, one measure. But because it's yours and you own it, you become part of it. So that's the small condition, the small necessity, especially today. So it has to be something that we initiate and be wise to read the sikhs. You're not going to be forced. But if you take them seriously and you understand the gravity of the situation, everyone has this option. There's no one listening to this or anyone on earth that cannot be a full-fledged, first-class citizen, shliach, Lubavitcher, if they embrace this b'mesira and the sinna. Okay. One qualification before I continue on. This does not mean that a person who's in business and maybe, let's say, not yet doing what I've just described, that doesn't mean there's a mitzvah to be mefanes ishte, and mishpachte and b'nei beise. So we're not talking about fulfilling halacha that says you have to be responsible to support your family. There's no question. I saw someone wrote to me that the Rebbe, someone asked the Rebbe around Tovshin Lametes, Memtes, that he can't find a suitable shlichus. So would it be okay to get a regular job for parnosa? And the Rebbe answered something to the effect, the farnes beise b'nei ishte is achiv al pi shulchan aruch k'mefurish. So clearly, obviously, the Rebbe is not going to tell someone not to be mefarnes. That's itself a mitzvah. But if you want to talk about embracing in the context of shlichus, is what I've said, because you can do that, be mefarnes b'nei ishte, and it should be saturated, and know that it's not just for parnosa, but it's also to use that hashgacha pratis, the people you meet, the opportunities that come your way, to use it for where the core kavanah and core mission is. Okay, let's move on to another subject. Let's talk about another topic I began last week, which was about davening, prayer. So, following up that, I received several questions. Let me read these questions. Avedis Hatfilah. Please don't refrain from spelling out how one davens b'aveda just because you need to grow in this department too. So they're telling me, because I need to grow, and I can tell you, rest assured, I sure do need to grow in this department called tefillah, prayer. Don't refrain from spelling it out. Well, that's very nice to tell me, but you don't want to sound like a hypocrite. But based on the story I said, clearly every one of us, every Jew, every Chassid wants to daven. It's just that sometimes it's your kavanah pnimi, it's inside, like the Rambam Paskins and Hilchos Gedushin, and externally you don't always see it. So I totally agree that we have to address this topic no matter where we're holding, and everyone has to grow, including myself, in this regard. So when you say daven with the peace you've learned, what does that mean? You say davening b'aved is not merely with the kavana, even pnimi of a particular piece of davening, rather it means to actually be at the yirid. Referring to the story I mentioned about the Magid, that you need the material, so you have to actually travel there. Also, is it emotional work? I don't know what this means. I went through the system, no one explained it, so please do whatever research is needed to explain this and share it with us, and we can all grow together. Thanks for the fantastic shiurim. That's always good to hear. The end is a compliment. Okay. Another questioner says that we don't just want an intellectual answer, I want one from the heart. With the issue of how to daven. Okay. And there were a bunch of other questions, so let me talk about this for a moment. As I said then, it's a lost art, in my opinion. Prayer is a lost art. Besides the fact that it wasn't taught to us and the importance of it, it became something of like this thing we do, prerequisite thing to do. Some call it lip service, you can call it whatever you want to call it. So let's just describe for a moment what Chassidus says about tefillah. And this is a number of places where this is discussed, starting from the Alter Rebbe, obviously, in Tanya, especially Perikut Beis and other places, where he calls it a Eis Ratzon. Time of davening is a Eis Ratzon, it's a special time, a window of opportunity, where you can be stronger in your divine connection, meaning your divine soul, and have more power to deal with the animal soul. And then there's the spillover, how it affects the rest of the day. So let's speak about it in simple English, which makes it a lot simpler. The fact of the matter is we're material creatures that live in a material world. That's what affects us. Wake up in the morning, the first thing you feel physically, you're hunger. You're thirsty, you're tired, you're this, you're that. If you just go by your own whims and by your own inclinations and temptations, it's all physical. We're physical beings. That's what we experience. Lev Yitzchak Baditchever once famously said to the Eibishter, "Nu a kunz, a trick. You give them the physical world to live in, and you write about Elam Haba, about spiritual worlds in the Sfarim. What do you expect? Why don't you try the other way around? Give them Elam Haba, give them a feeling, a natural feeling for spirituality, for Ruchnis, for Elokus, and write in the books about Elam Haza. Let that be the novelty, the book, the story, and you'll see how they behave." But that's how God did it. B'loshen Chassidus and Kabbalah, Tzimtzum Arish. It's all, you could all blame the big scapegoat called the Great Tzimtzum. God inverted reality, where the divine becomes a novelty, and material world becomes what's natural to us. B'loshen Chassidus, Elokus b'pshitus, and Elam is b'hiskashrus is before the Tzimtzum. God is the natural, and the world is a novelty, and now it's all inverted, where the glove can appear more important than the hand inside the glove. Elam is b'pshitas. The worlds are natural to us, and elokus b'hiskashrus, and godliness is a novelty, and we search for it. And then begins the day, you go to work, whatever it is we're involved in, we live in a material world. No one has to be trained to feel hungry. A baby cries when they're hungry or thirsty, when they're in pain. No one has to be trained. We naturally feel it. We naturally feel when we're tired. When it comes to Ruchnius, it doesn't come so natural. This is where davening comes in. It's meant to take a gashmizdika person whose neshama is more concealed or asleep, the way he puts it in Tanya, and wake it up. So you can wake up physically in the morning, but neshama ba'ape. Your soul is still so-called in your nose, which means it's not full-blown. Your soul meaning your divine soul. So you're physically, biologically, you're alive, but spiritually, you're asleep, or almost asleep. So what do we do? Miyad kishanir mishnase. As soon as you wake up, even before anything, even before washing your hands, you say Meida'ani, without the name, without God's name. The Rebbe has a whole kuntus in Yoshel Teres Chassidus that talks about it. What is the essence of it? Acknowledging that you have a soul, acknowledging that you have a spirit. That's where tefillah begins. That's obviously the beginning, the Bechas HaShachar, but even before Psukkah de Zimra. But tefillah essentially is trying to reverse the process of materialism being the ikir, and nefesh and neshash mashmasei tofel, by bringing the soul to the surface. So davening is not an intellectual exercise. It's an emotional one, Aveda Shebelev. But you begin by learning Chassidus, so to attune yourself, so you learn a little about Neshama, about Elikus, about Ruchnius. And then when you daven, emotionally is the challenge. You could, of course, take your mind and think about the spiritual. But can you emotionally feel spirituality as natural as you feel the material? That's the challenge. So real davening is a very qualitative shift, where you're taking a material being and say, I'm not going to focus on my material life. I'm not going to focus on my physical needs. I'm going to focus on my neshama. I'm going to focus on God. I'm going to focus on why God wants me here. That's tefillah, but emotional. So the key is to find space and time, because you have to dedicate that, contemplate on this, and the key is to awaken some feeling for your neshama, some feeling of attraction, of ava, and yira, and awe, love and awe for the divine. So to begin, the best, simplest way is simply to take one prayer and do this. To go and say you're going to suddenly shift cold turkey to a whole new way of being, mostly unlikely. But if you take one tefillah, Baruch Sha'amar, Moida Ani, Baruch Sha'amar, Shema, something in Shemoneh Esrei, it doesn't matter. And you can focus and put away the eyes. Shema, we cover our eyes. Why? Because you want to put away the physical and enter the spiritual. Find a way to get an emotional reaction to your neshama. That's the key. Once a person is able to ignite an emotional reaction to neshama things, to Elikus, you're talking real davening. Now, this doesn't happen quickly. This doesn't happen like in 10, 15 minutes. You have to apply yourself. So I think that this is a beginning of a step of the process. Then Chassidus talks about how you go up the rungs that I mentioned, the 4 rungs of tefillah, from Birchas HaShachar to Pesukah Dezimra to Birchas Krishma, Shema, Shemoneh Esrei, the different levels. But the first step is to create that type of emotional reaction. That's the last time you got excited about a neshama thing, a soul thing, a godly thing. One of the reasons we have a Rebbe, one of the reasons that we have Chassidus, is to help give us something exciting about godliness. I mentioned before we talked about Shlichus. That's also part of it. Dedicating your life, not to yourself and your needs, but to what God wants you for. Tefillah is the emotional Aveda of bonding emotionally. Ezu Aveda Shebelev, Zuhi Tefillah. That's the Aveda Shebelev, that's Tefillah. An emotional connection, emotional bonding, an emotional reaction and excitement about things that are not material, the things that are Ruchniisdik, Gettlichkeit, the Eibishter, and the connection to us and our neshama. I could say more, and I definitely will speak more, but I wanted to do something that is doable. Begin with something doable instead of just talking philosophically about it. How to get emotional about Ruchnius. Without Chassidus, without V'yadaita Hayim, it's going to be hard to get to Avashavesa Levavecho. You need some Yadaita, some connection to what God is about. Then you could say, I'm excited about this. I want this in my life. It's still a battle, because we still have to deal with the material world, and there's a lot of challenges around that. But there's at least something to begin working with. Okay. Another way to put it is that you're talking here about heart massage. I spoke about exertion and effort, heart exercise. It's emotional exercise of emotional exercising your heart to be able to connect in this way. Just wanted to add that one line. Okay. Now, let's go to another question. I want to add one thing. There's another letter from the Rebbe that is very relevant. It's a letter dated Chav Beis Cheshvan, Tafshin Lamed Gimmel, 5733. Okay, and the Rebbe writes, somebody writes to the Rebbe, he was writing that he had wrote a thesis and he was being criticized for it. So the Rebbe writes, don't be afraid of critics. Indeed, that's the sign of a good thing, is that there are people who will criticize what you're doing. Anything that has strong supporters will also have strong opponents, the Rebbe says. So you should have satisfaction from the fact that you were able to overcome the challenges and successfully defend your work. Then the Rebbe writes, with reference to your general question, if you have chosen the right course, I trust you know the basic principle of our sages of blessed memory, that the essential thing is the deed. That is to say, the practical result. Similarly, in your case, whether you have taken the right course or not will depend on how you will utilize your degree, knowledge, experience. If we'll utilize all this in the direction of the good and the holy, and will help illuminate your environment, it will prove that it was the right course. On the other hand, if your qualifications and capacities would not be utilized as above, even if they are not utilized in the opposite direction, the inevitable conclusion, with all due respect, would have to be that it was not the right course. For a person must not be a passive observer in the environment and society, not to mention a negative factor. But he has a duty to his society to be a positive and active agent to improve his environment. And everyone has the capacity to do so, at least in some degree. The Rebbe continues, if the above is true for every human being, there's an additional and very essential aspect in your case as a Jew. And he goes on to speak about the particular Jewish mission in this context. Here you have, in different simple English atheists in this letter, Shlichus. And what answers the other question that was asked about what is hiskashrus. That's why I'm reading it now. As a segue to preparing for Gimmel Tammuz, the question was asked, how do we prepare for Gimmel Tammuz? As well as, what is hiskashrus? What means, what is hiskashrus? What is the importance of it? How does one build it? So this is all answered in one question. Here, in a nutshell, goes back to what I said earlier. Generally speaking, the concept of hiskashrus to the Rebbe is connecting to the Rebbe and the Rebbe's mission that he's given us. As a shliach himself, a messenger from Hashem. In English word, the Rebbe just said that every person has two options. Whatever is given to them, are they going to use it to better society? Meaning, is it you dedicated your life to yourself or to helping others? Of course, the Rebbe goes on, helping others includes the whole what we spoke earlier about your futza meinesecha chutza, and so on. So really it comes down to that. Are you here to serve yourself, or are you here to serve a higher cause? In simplest terms, that's the deepest hiskashrus a person could have, recognizing and dedicating their life to that. So someone can say, what do I need a Rebbe for? Why can't I do it without the Rebbe? God gave us a mission. Well, let's be honest, even with a Rebbe, it's still difficult. Keirach had exactly this taina. It's interesting that Gimmel Tammuz happened with Tzoi Shabbos Parsha Keirach. And Yom Aleph, the Parsha Chukas. Similar to the Tzemach Tzedek writes about the Alter Rebbe, that it was Chavdala Tevis, was Tzoi Shabbos Shmois, and Eila Aleph of Parsha Ve'era. The Rebbe explains it in a Chelik Yud Aleph, different places, Chelik Tazayin actually. Shmois, we talks about Chavdala Tevis and other places. Motzoi Shabbos Keirach, what was Keirach? Keirach was the ultimate challenger of Nesias of a Rebbe. Madua tisnasu. Why did you lift yourself up? The entire community are holy. What do you do, Rebbe? We have a direct connection to God. And yet you find a Chumash, I started by the Parsha of Shidus Hayam, before they came to the Kriyas Yamsuf. It says, Vayaminu, after the parting of the sea, Vayaminu ba'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdei. They believed in God and Moshe his servant. The Medrash goes even further and says that one who doesn't believe in Moshe is like they don't believe in God. What kind of statement is that? Why equate the two? They believed in God. Moshe was sachakal gazim biyad ha'chetzev. He was like an axeman with an axe, bidding the mission of the chetzev. I should say not an axeman, an axe in the hands of an axeman. Gazan is an axe. The axe has no power. The axe, all it is an agent for the axeman. So why do we only mention Moshe? And to equate that believing in God is equated to believing in Moshe, is equated to believing in God. You have, the Alter Rebbe brings, of course, chapter 2 in Tanya, the idea of Anosia, the idea of a Neshama Klolis, that the whole generation is dependent on his soul. V'dofkabe, you should cling to Talmidei Chachamim, because they help you cling to God. How does all this smack in the face that we know that we have no intermediaries, we have a direct relationship with God? This is the question of what hiskashrus means. So, of course, the key principle is to understand that a Rebbe is not a mitzias. In the language of Chassidus, in Ranat, Tofresh Nun Tes, the Rebbe Rashab has a maimer, Ponim Beponim, it's a Shavuos maimer, where he talks about Ponim Beponim, he talks about Moshe Rabbeinu spoke face to face to God. What does that mean? Other Nevi'im did not speak face to face. It means that Moshe was a mamutza machaber. He was what it says calls there a transparent channel. that connect the two things. There's a mamutza she'ein mechaber. You could have a channel that connects, but not completely. You, for example, could have two entities. You have a barrel of wine, and you have a bottle. And you take a funnel, and you pour the wine in the funnel channels the wine into the barrel. Or the other way around. What is that? That is not a mamutza mechaber. There's something in between that's different. A translator, for example. Someone knows Hebrew, another person knows English. The translator knows both languages, so he can translate it. That's a mamutza mafsik. What does that mean? He's a translator. They will communicate with each other, but he's a third entity that's not an extension. He's not transparent. He can, first of all, change the translation a bit. He can't actually capture every word. He may make a mistake, etc., etc. A Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, is a mamutza mechaber. He's transparent. In Mitzvahs Minei Melech, he talks about the bittul of a melech, where most people say a king is defined by how great he is. Wise, powerful, ambitious, how much property he owns, how many horses he owns. A melech in Yiddishkeit is defined by his bittul, not by what he has, by what he does not have. No ego. David was the epitome, malchus. Les lamagar malklum, has nothing of its own. Im shavisi v'demamti. He was nothing. As a matter of fact, he was a bar nafla. Had he not got a blessing from Adam and the Ovis, who gave him 70 years together, he would not have lived. He would have miscarried, or born still born, because he was bottled with mitzias. So what makes a leader, a rebbe, a real rebbe, is not a mitzias. That's why Shmuel Hanavi explains in that Maimer in Derech Mitzvah Minei Melech. Shmuel Hanavi rejected the taina. The Jews came to him, wanted a king. He said, "What do you need a king? You have God." But it's a mitzvah in the Torah. Some tasim alecha melech. You should appoint a king. What was bothering Shmuel? Because he sensed that they don't want a king. What it says in the Torah, they want a king for nationalistic, for pride. They want to be like other nations. Hashem says, if they want that, let him have. And they appointed Shaul HaMelech. He anointed Shaul, but he wasn't the epitome. He was not the epitome of Malchus. Because a king in the Torah is not meant to appoint a king. What do you need a king? Melech Malchei Amlach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why do you need a human king? You need a human king because he epitomizes bittul. He's not a mitzias, so you don't have a mamutza. You have something that epitomizes Eir Ein Sof. Chassidus talks about that God created the world with Eir Ein Sof. What do you mean Eir Ein Sof? God is the creator. What does he need Eir Ein Sof? He doesn't need it. But Eir gives us, in the world of mitzias, not built in mitzias nimtza. In the world of mitzias, you have an example of total bittul. Eir could not do anything unless it was bottled to the Eibishter. So it's what it's called massless energy. It's energy without mass. It's basically the expression of bittul itself. Bittul in the state of existence like our own. Atzmos is built in Mitzias Nimtza. It's called a non-existential reality, non-existential existence. You can't have any relationship with Atzmos on our terms. Then it would be Kol Yoch, would be something impossible to understand. God wanted it to make it somewhat palatable, so he created an entity called Eir. But Eir is Chas v'Shalom. What is it? Eir is a mamutza? Eir is some type of new entity. There's only Hashem Echad. But because Eir is bottle, and the language of the Rebbe, bittul kenish bottle werden. If it's bottle, it's completely dedicated to the source. That's why I can connect the two. We say Torah is the mamutza between Elokus and Welt. A mamutza? What do you mean? God and the world. What do you need mamutza? Because Torah is a Reise v'Kudsha B'richa, because Torah is Torah Eir. Torah is bottle to the Eibishter. It's Chachmasir Tzenish L'Kadosh Baruch Hu. So what is a Rebbe? A Rebbe epitomizes what is bittul talakusis. That's his mitzias. But Meil, you're not talking about an entity. You're talking about a non-entity that takes on the shape of an entity that we can somewhat hold on to, that we can look at, we can see. But he's basically manifesting Isha Lekim. So hiskashrus and a dveikus to a Rebbe is not dveikus to another entity, not God. It's godliness manifesting. And that's not a stir at all. Godliness, not God. There's one God. Eir Ein Sof is not a stir, no, and the same thing as a Rebbe. Maybe even deeper levels. A Rebbe is a etzem, not Eir. The idea, however, is that you're not dealing with something that's a mamutza mafsik, you're dealing with a mamutza machaber. So on one hand, there's something similar, because you can speak to a Rebbe, you can see him, you can identify with him, etc. You go into Yechidus, it says the Yechida of the Rebbe connects with the Yechida of the Chassid. This, in essence, is our relationship with the Rebbe. And by connecting to the Rebbe, you're not connecting You're connecting to God's mission. That's why V'aminu b'Hashem b'Moshe Avdi, because God wanted not just godliness in this world, He wanted examples. He wanted something living on earth with flesh and blood, born to parents, a Yelid Isha, to epitomize what Atzilus looks like on earth, what Elokus looks like on earth. And that gives us the strength. Now, if a person says, I want a relationship with God, but I don't want a relationship with His tzaddikim, Shasna b'chol der v'dei, that He planted into each generation, then you're also denying God, because God chose that. That's what He wants. He gave us a Torah. Kerach said, yes, but there's a fundamental connection. That's true. But that connection is revealed through the leaders of the generation, through the leader of the generation. Just like Torah. Someone could say, what do I have a connection to God Himself? What do I need Torah for? Torah gives you how to connect. And Torah is not an additional element. Torah is an extension of godliness, expressed in the Chochmah Retzeinei, telling you, these are the mitzvahs, these are the wisdom, what Hashem wants you to do, and the wisdom that's supposed to guide your life. That connects, because it's not a mamutza, God forbid, that separates. It's a connector. A separator would be, so to speak, another entity that helps you along, that guides you, that may be a coach, and so on. This we're talking about is fundamentally made of the same material, ponim b'ponim. Spoke face to face, without veils. So how do you prepare for Gimmel Tammuz? You prepare for Gimmel Tammuz, not the day, Gimmel Tammuz. We're talking about really, I would rephrase it. How do we connect with the Rebbe all the time? Gimmel Tammuz is just an excuse, because obviously it's a day that evokes in all of us all kinds of feelings, and you want to turn them into positive things. Hiskashrus, the Rebbe said, what is hiskashrus? Connect to the Rebbe. Look at the Shlichus in Tafshin Yud, to what he learns, what he teaches, and what he asks of us. It takes me back to the beginning of this discussion. Shlichus, that you are here, you're sent here on a purpose. That purpose is 24/7. No matter what you're doing, that is the purpose of your life. That's hiskashrus. Hiskashrus obviously includes learning what the Rebbe learns, learning what the Rebbe teaches. Obviously the takonis, as the Rebbe says, first with chitas, with the Friedrich Rebbe, in our case the Rambam, and the other shiurim that were designated different times. So you have things that are connecting. Anon nafshik sovis yehovis. You hear, and I'm not here to critical or be negative about any of the so-called preparations for 20 years Gimmel Tammuz, but I will say the following. Anon nafshik sovis yehovis. The Rebbe and his Torah are one. The Eibishter says it, we're coming to Shavuos, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Anochi, Rashi Tevis, Ano nafshik sovis yehovis. I have engraved my soul, have given, Yovis is given, have engraved, imbued my soul in these words. Ano nafshik sovis yehovis, in the Ksav. So you want Eibishter, Esi atim leichim, you take him, when you take Torah, you take the etzim of the Eibishter. Because as I said before, Torah is not a separate entity. When you talk in Chassidus, you say Atzilus. Atzilus is Iyu v'chayu yechad, Iyu v'garmu yechad. You can't call Atzilus Elokah, but you can call it Elokus. The Eibishter, that some Ayin Beis, he says that Alter Rebbe would call Atzilus, that Eibishter, Elokus, as Hecher. So it's Elokus, not Elokah. So Atzilus is an extension. It has nothing else but being an expression of our godliness. Why then is it not God? Because God is a lot more than that. Hu mekeme shalelim ve'en elim mekeme. Here it's even more, because the Eris and the Kalim, the energies and the containers, are simply divine agents. In Biyah, in Bri Yetzir Asiyah, they already start becoming an entity of their own. I exist. The level, different measures as you go downward. In this world, it's Aniva Afsiyah, I and nothing else, and you barely sense, as I said, naturally, a higher presence. In Atzilus, the presence of the divine is felt all the time, in a structure called Chesed, Chochmah, Bina, Da, the 10 spheres. A Rebbe is even higher than that, but just as an example, it's Elokus Ongetan and Aguf. So he's dressed up in his body, and so when you connect to a Rebbe, like connecting to Torah, you're not connecting to an outside entity, you're connecting to a manifestation of godliness. The Rebbe says, learn Rambam. The Rebbe says, learn Chitas. The Rebbe says, go on Shlichus. You're talking about the divine messenger. He is the channel, the ambassador, that's bottled to the source, that in turn teaches us how to be bottled to what is higher than us. If you look in the Sikha Chayesodem Mem Zayin, it's a beautiful Sikha about Shlichus. Right in the beginning, the Rebbe says, he brings from the Likutei Torah that Shlichus is rooted all the way in the highest levels. In the Likutei Torah Vayikra, he says Shlichus is said about Torah mitzvahs, kabde my shluchim, they're called, honor the shluchim that are my shluchim, the Eibishter shluchim. Then he talks about that Shlichus is the neshama, of course. And he says every level, in Kutatera there, that's outside of Atzmus is already called a shliach. Eid Ein Sof, because it is has a cause that's causing it to be Eid, that means Eid is a shliach. So essentially, and if you go, then he continues all the way down to real shluchim gashmim in this world. So essentially, a Rebbe is a shliach, therefore he makes shluchim. And he creates a transparent channel that connects it all straight to Alakus Atzmus Aleim. You have the Rebbe use that expression a number of times. So, Gimmel Tammuz, essentially we're talking about honoring and connecting to the Rebbe, the etzem of the Rebbe. You can connect, you can talk about the Rebbe. Let's talk about the Rebbe, what he did when he was young, what he did when he was older, how he did this thing, did that thing. That's a biography, that's a room, it's valuable, can inspire people. But you want the etzem of the Rebbe, the Torah of the Rebbe. So I suggest that the way we have to prepare is share the Rebbe. Share the Rebbe with people. Share the Rebbe with yourself. And share the Rebbe means share what the Rebbe teaches, what he represents, what he wants of us. His approach to life and his requests of us and his expectations of us. That is the best way, because then you're getting the core. That's the essence of it. In the coming weeks, we plan to unveil Meaningful Life Center, a few ways that make it easier for people to do that, to share the Rebbe. But that is the best way to prepare. And it's something that's completely positive, doesn't have any negative elements to it. It's not about remembering 20 years ago. It's remember, the Rebbe, that was the essence of the Rebbe in Tovshin Yud, and Tovshin Chof, and Tovshin Lamed, and Tovshin Mem, Tovshin Nun. You don't have to wait till after Gimmel Tammuz. I know Nafshik Shavas Yehovah is all the time. Even when you physically saw the Rebbe, what are you seeing? You're seeing a body. But what does he manifest? And how do you grasp his etzem? By learning what he learns, by learning by doing what he wants you to do, which is an extension of Vayiminu B'Hashem, what Hashem wants us to do. The Rebbe tailors it, directs it as the mentor of the generation, of the visionary of a generation, into what we have to do in this time, relating to us, Isha Lakim, but in terms of Adam Lamata, a human being down here on earth. Someone once, and I'll conclude with this, someone once brought the Rebbe a book of manuscripts from one of the Tzemach Tzedek or one of the Maitikim, a copy of Maimorim, and the Rebbe was very, of course, happy to. We know the Rebbe called his Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming hostages, because this is the words of the Rabbeim. The Rebbe explained when they talked about the Sfarim and the Frierdiker Rebbe wouldn't leave Russia, even though it was Pekuach Nefesh Mamish. After he was freed, after Yud Beis Tammuz, wouldn't leave without the Sfarim. Why? Because the Sfarim is Anon Nafshik Shavas Yehovah. It's like the Rabbeim themselves. The Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, would not leave Russia without the Rabbeim. Imagine the Rabbeim are sitting and they say, no, you stay, they stay here, you go. He didn't see it as Sfarim, as manuscripts. He saw the Rabbeim in the Ksavim. The Rebbe himself was in the Ksavim. So the Rebbe received this book from him, this book of manuscripts, the Sefer, this Bichel. And he said to him, since you brought me something so valuable, I'd like to give you something of value. So he said, what? So he said, what would you like? So the guy says to the Rebbe, he was an American boy, I think maybe from Canada, Toronto. He says to the Rebbe, I'd like to have an autographed photo of the Rebbe. You know, that's what celebrities do, right? You get a picture with a signature. The Rebbe smiled and said to him, why do you want that? He says, I want to connect with you. So the Rebbe said, you want to connect with me? Learn what I learn. Do what I do. The Rebbe said, directed him to Kahos, to go buy any sefer, and get any sefer you want, and free. This wasn't just an expression. That's what it comes down to. It's not the picture is very nice. The signature is very nice. The Ksaviyat is nice. The Arum is very good. But you want the core, me. Esi atem leichim, the etzem. You get that in Anon Nafshis Ksavos Yehovah, in the Ksavim, in the writings, in the teachings. Today, sadly, that's the only thing we can right now hold on to, Begashmis. But the truth is, it was always what the Rebbe is. So the Eibishter should bless us. We don't have to wait for all the different efforts we'll do. That even before Gimmel Tammuz, we won't need to have all our achanas. But meanwhile, we have to do what we have to do. And we will continue this theme in the coming weeks. You were listening to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 19. Please write in your questions to meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. So until next Sunday at 8 p.m., everyone should have a very meaningful, hiskashrus oriented, Shlichus directed, saturated with the sense that you're here on an indispensable mission that you and only you can accomplish. Thank you.